yeah, I know that I shared it. The vowels are part of the tradition, right? The Hebrew Bible itself, when it's written, does not have vowels, but they're vowels that are part of the tradition. I just want to show you one thing which I think is people might appreciate. Okay, we're gonna go to Sefaria and Tanakh. So in the very first word of the very first verse, you'll notice that underneath the bays are two vertical, then horizontal, and then one. And there's one interpretation that I saw brought down that when it comes, and this is actually related to our Mishnah a little bit, that when it comes to engaging in learning, it's a process. And first, when a person starts learning, they need to be supported, right? Like the vertical, I'm trying to make this bigger, but the two dots shows that one is on top of the other, that in order to be able to kind of be in that ideal space, right, it requires support. After a person has gained some self-sufficiency and proficiency, then they're able to kind of shift over to like a level of kind of a horizontal dynamic of chavrusa. And then, right, a person is really able to stand independently and be kind of in that teacher's kind of perspective. But there's a progression of assistance to kind of create some sort of partnership to be able to kind of go at it solo. But that's the way these things work. Anyways, the vowels themselves have deep. I'm sure I don't know if we spoke this, but in Zohar it says that this dot here in the bays, it's not actually a dot, it's an aleph. You can't tell because it's so tiny, but it has to do with the physical and the spiritual and all of the dark space. All right, not for today. Oh, come on, here we go. But what we do have today is Rabbi Yehuda. So again, same generation, student of Rabbi Akiva. And one of the things that we've all observed here is that there's a shift from kind of broad principles of interpersonal dynamics about honor and glory and things to really focusing those in the dynamic of the tradition. Because when we don't have a temple anymore and we don't have sacrifices and all sorts of other things have shifted, to make sure that we have that continuity from one generation to the other becomes really essential. And as a result, there's a amplification of the nuances within those dynamics. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Havi Zahir b'Talmud. A person has to be really careful. But Talmud means not just in the Talmud as the Gemara, but Talmud in terms of study. And it's all connected, right? That we're talking here about the honor of one's students, and we're talking about honoring one's rabbis. And here we're saying that it's important that a person honors the text itself, right? And if you think about the dots, right, there's a way in which, right, having a Rebbe, having different dynamics, right, still require an appreciation of what you're getting engaged in. So Rabbi Yehuda says you have to be careful with the study. Shigigas, the root there is shogeg. Shogeg is generally understood as a transgression that happens when a person is spaced out. Right? Either you forgot that the thing was prohibited, or you knew that it was prohibited, but you just forgot what you were doing. You were just spacing out. So normally that low level, and so when it comes to sacrifices, whenever if a person sinned unintentionally, that's how they translate it. So you bring a carbon chatos, you bring in the sin offering. The sin offerings, when they were brought, were always brought for kind of a unintentional sin. If a person sinned on purpose, right? It's Yom Kippur, and they say, I know it's Yom Kippur, I know we're not supposed to eat if we're healthy. I'm eating because I'm upset with God. The next day, a person feels bad. So you can't bring a carbon chatas, you can't bring a sin offering, because the sin offering works when a person forgot it was Yom Kippur, or they knew it was Yom Kippur, but you forgot they weren't supposed to eat. Okay, so what the Mishnah here says is that when it comes to rabbis teaching or studying, if a person needs to be careful, because if a person makes a mistake, right, which normally is considered to be shogeg, here it's considered like it's mazid, right? Because there's a way in which, right, there's one job here, there's one expectation, which is to get it right. And the only way you could possibly get it right is if you focus on it, if you focus it with a sincere heart and you're diligent. So if a person is not taking it seriously, so then there's no excuse, right? It's like, I don't know, a person comes into surgery drunk. Like there's no tolerance, right? Because the level of precision is so severe that you have to bring your A game, right? You can't You can't be distracted. So when it comes to learning, a person who is not being careful, so then they're held responsible because it's not a mistake anymore. It's called negligent. Rabbi Shimon says, and of course these connections, these teachings are connected. Shleishik Sorimhem. There are 3 crowns: Keser Torah, the Keser of Torah, the Keser Kohuna, the crown of the priesthood, right, for those who descend from Aaron HaKohen, the Keser Malchus, and those King David, the Davidic line of kingship. The Keser Shem Tov, and the crown of a good name is Oil al Gabehen, right, supersedes them all. So the first obvious question is, how can you tell me that there's 3 crowns when clearly there's 4, right? So the simple interpretation is that no, that there are 3 crowns, but this aspect of a Shem Tov, right? A person who's a big Talmid Chacham, but everybody hates them, it's not helpful. A person's a Kohen, but people don't get along with them. That person, nobody's going to want them to redeem the firstborn. And so too when it comes to the Malchus, King David in particular had a very hard run of it. For a lot of reasons that weren't his fault, but the idea of a Keser Shem Tov, that a person, even without knowing a lot of Torah, even without, I'm sure I've said this over, but Rav Moshe Feinstein was the previous generation's greatest rabbi in America. His son just passed away last week or the week before. Still his one son was alive, so he passed away in the 80s. He was born in Russia. And again, just the biggest halachic decider of the previous generation. So when I was learning in Lakewood, I studied by Rav Simcha Bar Cohen, who was very close to him when he was growing up and as a young man. And Rav Simcha Bar Cohen used to say over that when he would be by the Rav's house, the Rebbetzin, his wife, Rav Moshe Feinstein's wife, would say to him, "A genius like my husband you'll never be, but a mensch like my husband you could be," right? There's no excuse not to be nice to people. You don't need to be a kohen. You don't need to be a Talmid Chacham. You don't have to be a king. To be a good human being, that people like you, that they want to spend time with you, that they'll recommend you, that they'll, right, that a person has a good name, that is something that's actually worth more than all of the things. And that's why there's a Mishnah also that says, that a mamzer Talmid Chacham, a mamzer, somebody who was born out of kind of an illegitimate, probably need better language for this, but a person who was not born in the best of circumstances, born into this world, is still, from God's perspective, more dear to God than the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, because it's hard to take you can't take credit for things that you didn't choose. A person's born into wealth, it's not impressive, right? A person works hard and builds something, that's impressive. The next generation, the Gemara says, why is it that you see, we don't have to get political to see what happens sometimes when people inherit a lot and then want to take credit for it when they don't earn it. But the Talmud talks about why very often you don't have kids of Talmudic scholars following the same footpath, in the same footsteps. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But the Talmud makes the observation that there's just a lack of appreciation for it often for those who don't have to work for it. And so what our Mishnah is kind of putting together here is that that we are held responsible for the things that we can affect. We can affect whether or not we're paying attention when we're studying. We can affect and therefore held responsible that when we teach things, are we teaching them with clarity, or are we teaching them in a way that's going to be potentially misunderstood, right? We're going to see the Mishnah says a person shouldn't teach with that kind of ambiguity, thinking, well, at some point they'll figure out what I meant. That's not good. We have a responsibility to be clear. So the greatest responsibility, and I think this is such a powerful teaching, that even when we think about, or especially when we think about the transmission of the Torah as the Messiah, as the tradition, if you can't retain a good name in it, if people don't like you, then what good is the Torah that you're giving over, right? Nobody has universal appeal, and people are complicated, and everybody has their moments. But if a person doesn't produce enough goodness, that people don't see them as being good, then there's something deficient, and it's tricky. I mean, at CBST we get emails all the time with people who are not happy with us. It's just part of being in communal service, right? A person's not queer enough, they're not flamboyant enough, they're too flamboyant. Well, the way in which one person is for one person is fantastic, for somebody else it's the exact opposite. So we're not in the position. We are not in the business of trying to make everybody happy and compromising who we are. But when we think about who we are, even for people who disagree with us, there can still be an understanding of the goodness. In my head, in the political world, when that famous clip where John McCain is correcting a woman who's speaking about Obama as saying like he's an Arab and he's not, right, all the things. So he says, no, he's a good human and I disagree with him. Like a lot of that has been lost. But, and you see this even in the rabbinic world. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs passed away last week before. Rabbi Steinsaltz also passed away in the last few months. These were people who in their lifetimes were often criticized. They're being too egalitarian, they're being too progressive, they're too focused on interfaith work. But when they pass away, the entire world comes together and says, these were great tzaddikim, these were wonderful people, and the world's deficient for it. So I wish people could do that in people's lifetimes, right? But there are examples of people who have a shem tov, right? You could disagree with them. You could think that like it shouldn't be so outwardly focused. We're so broken internally, fixed. Okay, reasonable people can disagree. But the shem tov itself, right? People, I got to meet both of them and heard them speak, and I've been very blessed to meet wonderful people. I've also met people who the world thinks they're wonderful people, but the closer you get to know them, you're like, why would anyone want to see you again? You're just an obnoxious human being. That's been that's the exception. But I think that this is not a complicating teaching, right? That and I think it's really interesting historically that people can have a lot of Torah, but if it's not sweet, it's not Torah. Meaning people can know what page and how many lines up from the bottom something is. But if it doesn't inspire people to want to be better, and I think that's the idea here. The word keser itself has a numerical value of 620. Tuf is 400, Resh is 200, and then the Chaf is 20. So we know that there's 613 commandments, biblical commandments, and there are 7 rabbinic commandments. So the 613 and the 7 rabbinic forms the 620 for keser. So when we think about the keser of Torah, really, what it really means is both the biblical and the rabbinic. And it's so interesting that when we think about the role of having a good name, it's a good name in the pursuit of trying to fulfill these commandments. And the Talmud tells us that when a person learns something, it's as if they're doing the thing itself. And I don't think it's coincidental that these two things are put together. In fact, for those people who have a custom on Shabbos or Yom Tov to read Ein Kelokenu, Ein Kelokenu is the introductory paragraph to Pitzma Ketores, which lists all of the ingredients and some of the offerings, the incense. And in there, it mentions that anybody who leaves something out, they skip some of the ingredients, there's a punishment. And it's one of the reasons why most people don't, in Israel they recite it, but they don't recite it in the diaspora during the week. It's only on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And the reason is that people were worried that if a person's running off to work, a person's running off for something else, they might skip some of the ingredients. And being that when a person studies something, it's as if they've done it, they might incur kind of the consequence of offering an incomplete sacrifice. So by linking the necessity of being a good person with the necessity to learn properly, right? I think what it's saying is the way in which we learn properly is by being able to learn from the feedback we get from other people about whether or not we are, internalizing, manifesting the teachings in the universe. Because if people don't like us, and we all have enemies, I don't want to speak for everybody. I certainly have a lot of enemies. And I think for some of them, it's on them. And for some of it, for sure, I could have been better about things. But when we think about people who nobody has a good word to say about, right? So then it's already skewing in a way that there should be some sort of introspection. Okay, want to pause and hear people's thoughts on the Mishnah or any of the teachings or on any of the vowels or diktuk or whatever people are interested in. We have a few minutes left. It's also people can push back. I think it's a struggle to try to, to be true to oneself, to not have to apologize for being who one is, and to also realize that the way we are in relationship with other people is not always easy. It's not always easy. It's not always easy, and it's not supposed to be easy. We're different people. Regardless of the dynamic, whether it's a friendship or an intimate relationship or it's in a workplace dynamic, there's a lot to learn about oneself when a person is open to growth and hearing from other people. And there's a lot that we can work on that in isolation we could never do the work, because we would automatically think that we're doing well because we're not bothering anybody, because there isn't anyone to bother. Yeah, I don't know. Do people have thoughts on trying to figure out the balance between embracing and feeling good about who we are while simultaneously recognizing that there's always more work to be done? Saul, you're being very
see that brings up a whole thing about how, if we're thankful that or that's been going on in my head for the last couple of days, of to be thankful for the things the way they are, to be thankful, that I'm standing on my own 2 feet for all my own personal reasons. And if we're just thankful for the way things are, then how do we get better? How do we get better if we say, this is the way God wants it to be, and this is, and to say, but since we don't really know how God wants it to be, and so I say to myself, okay, I could, as you often say, I could go to the gym more often. Today I use the rain as an excuse not to go to the gym. Or there's always a reason not to go, even though I know there's a reason to go. But I could slip into, this is the way God wants it to be. So why should I? And I remember when Rabbi Kleinbaum was teaching a class on the Yiska prayer, and somehow or other I got really angry, because I thought about all the people who went to the camps willingly, who said, this is the way God wants it to be. And so I'm going. And they didn't join in up, they didn't become part of a fight against it. They just went. And how could you just go? Of course, it's 2021 now, or 2020. Sorry, I don't mean to chop off the next month and a half. But it's like I'm not in that world and in that time.
Yeah. So it's a great observation. It's always tricky to know when is faith meant to be comforting and when is faith meant to be kind of inspiring. I think for me, faith is a call to action. And I think for many, faith is not that. Faith is, and I think I don't want to speak for other people, but I do think that it's a mistake to kind of accept. Somebody once wrote poetically 20 some years ago that the word cope and the word change, right? That, in other words, that faith helps us cope, but faith doesn't help us change. And I think that that's a mistake. If a faith helps you cope, but faith doesn't help you change, and there's something deficient in the faith, right? Because faith is meant to make us feel that like we're in partnership with God, and so we can make a difference. I mean, you see this hypocrisy in the right-wing conservative movement, right? People say, listen, I don't need to wear a mask because God runs the world and I have faith. But they do feel the need to, carry around an AK-47, right? If your faith is strong enough in God, that God will protect you with a mask, without wearing a mask, so that God should be able to protect you out without carrying around the gun, right? So I'm not saying that I am saying people should wear masks, and the gun piece is a separate piece. But you do see that people use faith as a way of supporting their own worldviews, right? In Yiddish, it's a stir minei obey. It's a self-contradiction to say that you can have faith in God, that whatever happens, to not wear a mask, but to say like you don't want to have faith in God when it comes to like carrying around, assault rifles. Either you believe that God runs the world or you don't. So we can believe that God runs the world, but God is in partnership with us, that we have to take responsibility for the things that we can't. Faith in the Jewish tradition picks up where the intellect ends, right? We are responsible to try to understand things, right? Both within grammar and in terms of science and in nature and in medicine. We have a responsibility to listen to doctors and to support the medical community's development and evolution of understanding. But wherever it is on a particular day, there's an end. doctors can't make us live forever. They can't heal all of the sicknesses. In that place, right, where the doctors say, listen, there's nothing left for us to do, we understand, okay, you're limited, but there's no limitation on what God can do. So it's in that space when we've exhausted the physical, right, that faith can help provide some sort of comfort. But until that point, right, then faith is meant to give us the motivation to do all the things within our power. So again, that's just the way that I see it, but I think it's supported by our tradition. And it's tricky. It's very tricky because, we're supposed to love other people like we love ourselves. And it's very difficult to love oneself, especially if you think a lot about our own imperfections, right? The closer your face is to the mirror, right, the more you see all the stuff. And that's fine. And I think that there's two types of love. You see this we just read about this with Esav and with Jacob. There's, and I know that we're running short on time here, but it's an important point. There's something in our tradition that's known as ahava, love, she'ina tluya b'davar, that is not dependent on anything. We would call it, it's unconditional love. It's not dependent on anything. There's no conditions. And then there's certain love that is conditional, right? That, like it says about Esav, Isaac loved him because, right? This and that and the other things. Like, why did he love him? It wasn't the same type of unconditional love that Rebecca had for Jacob. It was different. So the love that God has for us is what's known as ahava she'ena tluya b'davar. It's not dependent on anything. We don't need to earn God's love through our actions during the day. And when it comes to loving another person, the truth is, it says we're supposed to love our neighbors like we love ourselves. It's not dependent. You're here, you have a soul, you're breathing, we're supposed to love you. But there's other things that, like, do I want you to be my neighbor? Like, that is actually kind of, like, I don't want to be living next to people who, right, have a certain, I don't know, they're homophobic. I don't want such people as neighbors. It'd be great to have them neighbors to make them no longer homophobic, right? But there are certain things that we can say, like, I don't want to go to services where we're talking about Jews for Jesus. I'm not interested in that, right? So we have intolerable deviancies. And we have certain types of dynamic that are absolutely dependent on that love, right? Hopefully. So anyways, it's tricky to try to be able to feel the love that exists because of a baseline. We're humans, both for ourselves and for other people, and to also feel motivated that there are actually things that we can do to bring the world closer to God closer to the world, and ourselves to each other. And there are things that we can do to bring ourselves closer to ourselves, right? The shame, for example, and then this will end. There's two types of shame in our tradition. There's a shame that comes from an evil source, and there's a shame that comes from a positive source. And maybe shame is the wrong word. But the difference between the two is whether or not it motivates us to do better. A person does something and they regret. I lost my temper at this person, or somebody reached out and I blew them off, or like I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed that I acted a certain way. So a person can either say, well, that's because I'm a horrible human. That's because I'm, like, not good with people and better that the world shouldn't have me. That's coming from the negative place. That's coming from the place of evil, that the negative action is actually a reflection of me being negative. As opposed to, okay, that was an action that was motivated by whatever it was motivated from, but who I am is good. And if I can change my sensitivity, my motivation, my presence, so then I can change that, and the next time I can do better. And so that same experience can now motivate me to become a better human. So that's the work. The work is in recognizing that I have faith in my ability to change. That's what the Siva Shalom and others, the Stalmer Rebbe says, when it says, Tzadik be'emunasa yichya, it's Chabakuk. He says a righteous person lives with faith. And the way that they understand it is that the faith the righteous person lives with is that you can fall 7 times and still be called righteous. Tzadik Shiva Yipol Tzamak. Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'kom, that a righteous person falls and then they get up. So you have to have the faith that you can fall 7 times and still be called righteous. That's the struggle of faith, right? But again, that type of faith is one that motivates to action. All right, friends, it's always a pleasure. I will see everyone tomorrow. We are not meeting this week on Wednesday, and we are not meeting on Thursday. We're not meeting on Thursday because it's shut down, and we're not meeting on Wednesday because Wendy wants to do something with me Wednesday afternoon. And so I'm going to try to make my wife happy. But we will pick up the following week. So again, today is Monday. We'll be here. Tomorrow we will be here. Wednesday and Thursday we will not. Have a wonderful day, friends.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.